Welcome to the EPG Pathshala Linguistics course, specifically to the Morphology and Syntax paper. I am Prabal Das Gupta from the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, and today I'll be handling module number 7, Irregularity and the WWM model. In this module, which we are now beginning, we will show you what special tricks are used by the process approach, which is the main line of teaching of this morphology and syntax paper, to handle the special phenomena. Now, one way to group the special phenomena, which is shared by all approaches to morphology, is to classify morphological alternations into 3 types. Before we begin to classify morphological alternations, naturally you will ask us, what is a morphological alternation? To answer that question, it is easiest to use the morpheme theory because their terminology in this respect is very straightforward. As you know, the morpheme theory believes in one morpheme having more than one allomorph embodying it in different contexts. In other words, there is variation in the shape of a morpheme. That variation is formally expressed by showing the morpheme as having this allomorph, that allomorph, that allomorph. Alternation is the relation between allomorphs. When there are 2 different allomorphs and they express the same morpheme, we say there is an alternation going on, a morphological alternation. That is an alternation. As a result, instead of saying allomorph, we can use the other term morpheme alternant. In the early days of structuralist morphology, people didn't have the word allomorph. I think allomorph was coined in 1942. Before that, they used to call them morpheme alternants. Back then, they also didn't use the word morph. They used to call them morphemic segments. And for some of your purposes, you might prefer those older terms because they're much more transparent. A morphemic segment is a segment of a word that you chop out in the belief that it represents a morpheme. A morphemic alternant or a morpheme alternant is one of the alternating forms of a morpheme. These are transparent terms. There are some advantages to the older terminology. Now let us classify alternations into 3 types. Some alternations are automatic. They are a consequence of the phonological laws of the language. These alternations exist because certain combinations of sounds cannot be pronounced in that language. But the morphology tries to get those combinations to appear, so the language has to force its way through it. Those are called automatic alternations. All other alternations, as you can see, are non-automatic. So you've got a branching tree if you want, alternations on top, automatic on the left, the other branch is non-automatic. Now that right-hand branch then again branches out into the second type and the third type. So among the non-automatic alternations, there are some which are regular non-automatic alternations. Those follow some rule, that is why they're called regular. They follow the rule perfectly. And then there are the final types, the third class. They are called irregular non-automatic alternations. So you've got 3 types of alternation: automatic, regular, irregular. If you want a single word. If you want more than one word, if you want to be complete, you have to say automatic, non-automatic irregular, non-automatic irregular. However, in linguistics, when it is possible to use unambiguous single words, we do so. We know that when you say regular, you mean non-automatic regular, you don't mean automatic. So we prefer to call the second category regular rather than non-automatic regular. Likewise, when we say irregular, of course we mean non-automatic irregular. How can irregular be automatic? So we prefer to call the three types by one-word names: automatic, regular, irregular. These are the three types of alternation. And the question being discussed in this module is how are these three types handled in the WWM or whole word morphology model. Whole word morphology or WWM is the official term for the kind of process morphology approach that is the main line of teaching in this course. When you do your further reading, when you look up books and so on, you will find that some of the books describe it as seamless morphology, but the overwhelming majority of books and articles describe this approach under the label WWM or whole word morphology. That is why at this stage we're introducing the official term so that you don't lose your way in the references and the further readings. For the automatic alternations, whole word morphology follows the method that we've been teaching you most consistently, namely for an English adjective legal turning into an adverb. Yes, the morphology tries to make you pronounce legally with a double L. However, English phonology does not permit a double L in that kind of context. As a result, the phonology identifies that as a spot where intervention is necessary, and another part of the phonology, known as repair strategies, intervenes, deleting one of the two successive L's and leaving you with the final output legally, where there's a single L between the and the E at the end of the word. That is how automatic alternations are handled. For an automatic alternation, the whole word morphology approach postulates a word formation strategy which carries out the morphological part of the work. In the case of the adverb form of the adjective legal, it says X goes to XLI. In other words, Li is added to the adjective to make an adverb. Then the phonology does two separate jobs. One part of the phonology, a bunch of well-formedness constraints, also called WFCs, identifies places where there is a problem and intervention is necessary. There is a WFC saying that double L is banned in English. And once that targeting has been done, once the target has been chosen, there is a second part of the phonology known as repair strategies. Those strategies do the job that has been identified as requiring to be done by the first part of the phonology. So the second part, repair strategies, in this case intervenes by deleting one of the L's. Deletion is one of the ways in which repair strategies can intervene. The other methods are insertion and substitution. That is a fairly complete statement of how WWM handles automatic alternations in morphology. What about regular alternations that are not automatic? One example of such a regular alternation that we have given you in earlier modules is that when an English adjective ends in ic, like electric, plastic, toxic, the corresponding noun, which comes out as electricity, plasticity, toxicity, ends in icity. Notice that we are not saying X goes to xity over here, though there are cases where that strategy becomes useful. In this case, the strategy given by the morphology to cover these cases is xic goes to xicity. Why are we doing this? Because the K to S change, although it is a change of a phoneme, is not a phonological change. You need to understand that changing a phoneme does not necessarily mean a phonological change. A change is called phonological if the phonology orders it. The phonology of a language is concerned with what is pronounceable in the language and what is not pronounceable in the language. Therefore, it is an instruction from the phonology that thou shalt not say legally in English, thou shalt say legally. However, the phonology of English does not compel you to say electricity instead of saying electricity. So English does not prevent its speakers at all in the phonology from saying electricity or toxicity or plasticity. These are perfectly understandable errors by children who see a word and try to pronounce it, never having heard the word pronounced by others. They might end up saying electricity or toxicity, and they then have to be corrected. But the point is, they have no trouble saying it. Their tongue is not tied by the rules of English phonology. So, electric to electricity is not a phonological change. The K to S change is a change of a phoneme ordered by the morphology, not ordered by the phonology. The morphology is concerned with the shapes that words actually have, not with the shapes that words have to have. The phonology is concerned with the shapes that words have to have because of what can be said and what cannot be said, what your tongue in that language is capable of and what it is not capable of because of the habits that the tongue has been taught while learning that language. So, to get back to regular and automatic. Automatic changes are ordered by the phonology. Therefore, the WWM approach gives that task to the phonology. In the regular alternations, you're looking at changes that are not ordered by the phonology. That is why they're called regular and not automatic. But they're exceptionless. Every English adjective ending in ik that has an et form at all has an ect ending. There is not a single adjective in English ending in ik whose nominal form is ending in ikety. Ikety is an impossible ending for an English word. Morphologically impossible, not phonologically impossible. The point is there is in fact no word in English that ends in ikety except the word rickety, which is not part of our discussion. I suppose if somebody goes on about wickets when they are talking about cricket all the time, you can call them wickety or crickety and so on. Those ways you can end up getting words ending in ikety, but you know what I mean. There is never a word ending in ikety that comes from a word ending in ik. That's what I'm trying to say. So regular changes are handled by the morphology, and the phonology does not play a role in this work at all. The phonology may play a role if there is also something automatic going on at the same time as the regular stuff. But if it is regular stuff, then it is handled by the morphology. For example, when you look at these words ending in "-ine" in the adjective system, divine, saline, feline, and so on. And when you look at the corresponding abstract nouns, divinity, salinity, felinity, there you need to formulate a word formation strategy that says ex-ine, adjective, ex-inity, noun. Now the "-ine" turning into "in" is the work of the morphology, not the work of the phonology. People speaking English have no difficulty pronouncing non-existent words like divinity, salinity, or felinity. I'm having no trouble saying these words now that I'm telling you that people don't say it. There is nothing to stop me pronouncing it. I'm having no trouble at all. And that's not because of my phonetic training as a linguist. Any speaker of English who wishes to say, for some reason, salinity or divinity can do so without any trouble at all, without special training. It's not the tongue that stops you. It's not the phonology that prevents salinity or divinity or felinity. It's the morphology that tells you that these words are going to have the form salinity, divinity, and felinity. Therefore, what we're saying is you need a word formation strategy, and that's all you need to handle regular alternations. Now, what happens when you come to irregular alternations? Irregular alternations are cases where something goes haywire and you have to deal with the fact that they're going haywire. What happens there depends on the degree of irregularity. If you have extreme irregularity, there is one kind of job to do. When you have limited degrees of irregularity, there is a different kind of job to do. So it depends on what you're dealing with when you have an irregular alternation to handle. Extreme irregularity is cases like go having the past tense went. The shape of when and the shape of go are completely different from each other. They don't have a single phoneme in common. They are one kind of difficulty. But to return to our iti and the changes of vowels that we were talking about, there are certain cases where you expect a vowel to change, but the vowel does not change. Thus, for example, when you look at obese, obese is an adjective, you expect the noun to change the E at the end of the adjective into A. Why do you expect this? Because there's a whole class of such alternations. The adjective serene comes out as serenity. Other words ending in E of that kind include those whose pronunciation is slightly bent because of the R. You try to say sincere, but in fact you say sincere. But there the same change is happening. Sincere comes out in the noun form as sincerity. So you expect all these words like obese to come out as obesity. But in fact, the noun form of obese is obesity. There is an unexpected lack of change. How do you handle the unexpected lack of change in the case of obesity, given that you've got serene, serenity, sincere, sincerity, and any other word ending in "een" of this kind or "ear" of this kind will give you a noun ending in "enity" or "erity"? How do you handle the fact that obese doesn't change? That's a case of irregularity. Notice that the cases of sincerity and serenity are regular. You get it all the time. The answer that we use in the whole word morphology approach is that because obesity is an exception to an exception, you have to handle it separately in the lexicon, taking it out of this set completely. Fortunately, ease is not in the class of the cases where the alternations can be stated. Recall that you're getting alternations for sincere, sincerity, serene, serenity, and if there are other adjectives ending in "een," I'm sure that there are adjectives in technical terminology like scaling in geometry and probably similar words in chemistry, which I'm ignorant of because I haven't studied chemistry. If I had to make a noun from scaling, which is a property of triangles, you can form a noun scalenity, which would correspond to scalene, without even knowing that aspect of geometry, without perhaps being able to define what a scalene triangle is. You can do this automatically, effortlessly, because that is how English behaves. However, obese is outside this category. Fortunately for our analysis, there are no words, adjective words ending in "is" which have a noun taking the form "esity." So obese is completely unique. Obese doesn't stand in the way of other words. Therefore, we're entitled to say X is comes out as XE-city. However, there is a hitch in our plan to declare that there is a separate word formation strategy for obesity alone. So this is a long story, but if you go back to what we are trying to do here, we had to tell the long story to show you the details of the back and forth you go through when you try to do the analysis of a difficult case. Irregular cases are supposed to be difficult. If they were not difficult, they would not be irregular. This is an example of an irregular case that you're trying to handle and for which you end up finding a solution hiding where you least expected it. The irregular case turns out to fall under a general formula, XXT. Why is it irregular? Because it resists your expectation. Where did your expectation come from? It came from an illegitimate source, from English orthography, which is not supposed to be your advisor in linguistic analysis. That's how this happened. So to sum up this particular part of the module, automatic alternations are handled by the standard procedure of whole word morphology, working with those instruments in phonology that we've introduced earlier, well-formedness constraints and repair strategies. Regular alternations are handled by word formation strategies alone, of a particular kind. They specify very carefully which subclass they apply to. And irregulars are handled on a case-by-case basis. You look at the extent of the problem, you figure out how much needs to be done, then you do it. However, this doesn't address extreme irregularity of the go and went kind, where the past tense of go should be goed, but instead you're getting went. Those cases fall into two types. One type is called suppletion. The other type is called blocking. Suppletion has to do with inflection. Blocking has to do with derivation. This is a good point to very quickly say that inflection is the part of morphology that has something to do with the syntax, and derivation is the part of the morphology that does not. Suppletion is a case like you expect to see the past tense goed, but you get went instead. That is suppletion. It happens in inflectional cases. Past tense is an inflectional concept. The inflection of go is extremely irregular in English. You get went where you expect goed. It turns out that in other languages that I speak, Bangla and Hindi Urdu, again the inflection of the verb corresponding to go is irregular. In Bangla, the word for go is jawa. So you expect the past tense jelo, instead of which you get gallo. In Hindi, the word for go is jana. You expect the past tense jaya, instead of jaya, you get gaya. There seems to be a tendency among languages to have irregularity for the word go. I'm smiling because this is a joke. There is in fact no special tendency of this kind across all languages. You might find something happening in 3 languages or 5 or 10. And the moment you look past that set of 3 or 5 or 10 languages, you find that the pattern stops happening. So there is no such tendency. I'm joking. Please don't take what I just said seriously about verbs meaning go having a special tendency to give you difficulties. The German verb for go has no special difficulties of that kind. It's not a case of suppletion. It is slightly weird, but it's not at all as weird as the Bangla or Hindi Urdu or English or French. So to come back to suppletion and blocking, blocking is what happens in derivation. In derivation, where you expect people to say small, smallness, narrow, narrowness, instead of bigness, people say size. So you imagine that size being a specific word, having as it does the meaning you would expect bigness to have if bigness were a real word. you imagine that the existence of size blocks the formation of the word bigness. Now, the difference between blocking and suppletion is slightly tricky. You see, with suppletion, because you're dealing with paradigms are relevant whenever there is inflection. Paradigms give you unique slots. There is only one such thing as the past tense of go. And there you don't have competition between went and anything else. There's exactly one past tense of go, and that past tense is went. There's only one past tense, one plural of child, which is children. Inflection gives you uniqueness. In contrast, derivation doesn't give you uniqueness, by which I mean, in the case of size, how do you know that size is keeping the word bigness out of business? Surely you could also argue that size is successfully competing with largeness and preventing you from saying largeness rather than preventing you from saying bigness. How do you know what size is doing? How do you know which word it is blocking? Now you then scratch your head and say, yes, I noticed that people don't say bigness, they don't say largeness, and I don't have a unique way to decide which of these words it is that size is blocking. Do I want to say it is blocking both? I don't really have a way to pinpoint how much blocking work the word size is doing. Maybe you're right, maybe there's no exact answer to these questions. The result is blocking is hard to specify in comparison with suppletion, which happens in the inflectional paradigm, for which the points are unique and it's much easier to pinpoint exactly what is happening. So we are in a position now to summarize what has been done in this module. We were dealing with how the whole word morphology model, mind you, not module, deals with the kinds of alternation which we classified at the very start of the module into 3 types. The automatic kind of alternation, the regular type, and the irregular type. We first went over those, then we looked at some extremely irregular cases. There is additional material in the e-text that we urge you to look at. It is the kind of material that doesn't lend itself so easily to oral rehearsal and examination, because you need to look at exact phonological and phonetic symbols in the notation and very closely deal with the machinery. They have to do with the equi-specific strategies. We encourage you to read the e-text with special care this time, because we deliberately did not design the spoken module to completely cover exactly the same ground as the written module. In addition, as in every other case in this EPG Pathshala system, we encourage you also to consult the further readings that have been recommended for you in the e-text and in ancillary material. Thank you for your attention.